I want to do a video showing off the weirdest things people have done at their wedding. If you have videos showing the craziest weddings, share them with us at archie@manlybands.com. Marriage keeps popping up in news headlines, and it's not the first time cultures have evaluated the institution of marriage as a whole. But did you know that even though marriage has existed in some form since the beginning of humankind, traditional marriage has changed a lot throughout history? So let's take a trip down the historical highway and discover the weird history of marriage. Millions of movies, billions of books, and quite a few songs have been written about marriage, ranging from the heartfelt to the downright silly, and all the way to the heartbreaking. Looking at you, Dolly. Jolene, 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 Jolene. What they have in common is that they sound like they express a universal and timeless truth. But when I look at documented history over the centuries, nearly everything about marriage, from its main purpose to the kinds of relationships it covers to the rights and responsibilities involved, a lot has changed between different eras, cultures, and even social classes. If we look back on early humans, we see that they were nomadic, meaning that they would travel with migrating herds and hunt them for food. That is, the people would hunt the herds for food, not the other way around. Though I guess, sometimes it would happen. And during this time, we have historical evidence showing that humans were already pair bonding to survive. But one day, let's just say caveman George and maybe cavewoman Georgia decided to settle down and grow crops instead of following migrating herds. And this made a lot of sense. Instead of using a ton of energy to hunt, George and Georgia could stay in one place, store food, and protect one another from natural predators and competing tribes. When all the other nomads saw that George and Georgia had a pretty good thing going for them, they decided to give the whole pair bonding and farming life a try, and families began to grow and grow and grow. As these families grew, conflicts would break out over resources like food, shelter, and manpower. So a few rules started getting invented by those with power. George and Georgia wanted to make sure that their kids would benefit from their hard work when they died, so they decided to make this whole pair bonding thing something that would outlive them and pass on their accrued resources, calling it which of course is loosely translated to marriage. Marriage was a way of securing rights to land and property by designating children as the rightful heirs. The idea of marriage wasn't exclusive to monogamous couples either. In fact, the most common relationships during this time were polygamy, polyandry, and plural marriages. This practice was common in ancient Hebrew and classical Chinese. Polygamy was also encountered sporadically with Native Americans in the West African continent, Polynesia, India, and ancient Greece. The first recorded evidence of marriage ceremonies uniting one woman and one man dates from about 2350 BC in Mesopotamia. Over the next several hundred years, marriage evolved into a widespread institution embraced by the ancient Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans. But back then, marriage had little to do with love or religion. Marriage's purpose was to bind women to men to guarantee that a man's children were truly his heirs. Because there was just a bit of time before Maury Povich was to heir. You are Kevin's baby daddy. Back then, through marriage, a woman became a man's property, like a Roomba or a goat, which is terrible, but sadly true. In ancient Greece, a father would hand over his daughter with the words, "I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring." Can you imagine having that conversation with your in-laws today? And there was no expectation that the man would be monogamous. That seems fair. With the ancient Hebrews, men were free to take several wives. Married Greeks and Romans were free to sow their wild oats any way they wanted, and at this time, it was common for these men to have several concubines, prostitutes, and even teenage male lovers. Their wives were required to stay home and tend to the household, and if a wife failed to produce heirs, their husbands could give them back and marry someone else, which is an incredibly terrible exchange policy. Marriages would vary in the number of people they involved and the types of relationships as well. Same-sex unions have also popped up in various civilizations throughout history. Mesopotamian prayers included blessings for such couples, while Native American two-spirit individuals had relationships with both sexes. The first instances of same-sex marriages comes from Rome, where Emperor Nero and Elagabalus both married men in public ceremonies. Marriage didn't even necessarily need to be between two living people. Over in China, ghost marriages, where either the bride or groom were deceased, were conducted to continue family lineages or appease restless spirits, which is now why in our day we call our significant others our boo. That's not true, I just made it up. Despite all these differences, a lot of marriages throughout ancient history had crucial matters like property and reproduction at stake, but that also evolved. During the 11th century, marriage was about securing a political advantage. We would see this happening when a father would marry off his daughter so that the father would inherit more land, livestock, slaves, and ultimately power. Back then, the wishes of the married couple, much less their consent, were not so important in a marriage agreement. Apparently, even though your dad struggles to find a show on Netflix, this makes him wholly qualified to find a husband for you. However, for the Benedictine monk Gratian, the consent of the couple mattered more than their family's approval. Gratian brought consent into the fold of formalized marriage in 1140 with his canon law textbook Decretum Gratiani. The decretum, or decretum, or however you say it, required couples to give their verbal consent and consummate the marriage to forge a marital bond, because nothing's more sexy than legal obligations. This book formed the foundation of the church's marriage policies in the 12th century and set out the rules for marriage and sexuality in a changing social environment. As the Roman Catholic Church became a powerful institution in Europe, the blessings of a priest became a necessary step for a marriage to be legally recognized. You see, marriage was widely accepted in the Catholic Church as a sacrament back in the 8th century. And at the Council of Trent in 1563, this sacramental nature of marriage was written into canon law. That's actual law and not just laws about canons. Now, this was a big deal as it changed the way husbands were expected to treat their wives. For starters, men were taught to show greater respect to their wives and forbidden from divorcing them. The church also put new pressure on men to remain sexually faithful, which is something they probably should have led with. With all these marriages taking place over the centuries, we never see one big emotion being mentioned as essential for people sharing their lives together. And that's the L word, which is love. I'm not trying to trick you. So when did the L word enter the picture? And again, that's love, not the show. During much of human history, couples were brought together for practical reasons, not because they fell in love. Over time, many marriage partners fell deeply in love, but the idea of romantic love as a motivating force for marriage only goes as far back as the Middle Ages. If you ask a scholar who invented the concept of getting married for love, most will credit the French back in the 13th century and not John Cusack from 1989's Say Anything. Switching to romantic love as the reason to get married changed everything. Wives no longer existed solely to serve men. The romantic prince, in fact, sought to serve the woman he loved, not for dinner. That's our Halloween episode. Still, the notion that the husband owned his wife continued to hold sway for centuries. When colonists first came to America, the husband's dominance was officially recognized under a legal doctrine called coverture, under which the new bride's identity was absorbed into his. The bride had to give up her name to symbolize the surrendering of her identity, and the husband suddenly became more important as the official public representative of two people. This tradition didn't change until women won the right to vote. When that happened in 1920, the institution of marriage began a dramatic transformation. Suddenly, each union consisted of two full citizens, although tradition dictated that the husband still ruled the house. By the late 1960s, state laws forbidding interracial marriage had been thrown out, thanks to Loving v. Virginia in 1967. The first modern-day civil ceremonies took place in Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales in December 2005. And at that time, campaigners said the law ended inequalities for same-sex couples. It would be fair to say that marriage has evolved more in the last 100 years than it has in the last 10,000. The one constant message of marriage over the years is that humankind craves nutrition, protection, and companionship. And I'm available for all three. It's woven into the fabric of our DNA. And marriage in all its many forms has helped humanity to evolve where it is today. So, if you're ready to start writing your page in the history books, it's time to start planning your wedding. Check out this video I did on the groom's guide to wedding planning over here. And if you're already ahead of me and have the wedding all planned, then check out a few of my suggestions on the top honeymoon destinations over here. Till next time, Archie out. Hey Corey, did you hear about the two nuclear technicians that just got married? They say that the bride was radiant and the groom was glowing. Probably deserve that.